Well, thanks for staying with us on the program this morning. Our next conversation is tilting towards finding a lasting solution to the perennial issue of flood in Nigeria. The most recent impacts of flood in Nigeria has hit Adama in Yola, where over 5 persons lost their lives and, quite sadly, 55 persons injured amidst millions of properties lost to the flood. Our next guest joins us virtually. He is the Executive Director, Emergency and Risk Alert Abuja, Gbenro Olajuyigbe. Hello, good morning to you, Mr. Gbenro, and welcome to the program.
Pleasure being with you.
Now, Mr. Gbenro, it's no news the challenge of flood in Nigeria. Perennially, year after year, we continue to struggle with finding solutions to this. Many argue that we can better deploy the ecological funds. Many question the level of preparedness on the angle of the National Emergency Management Agency. Some persons also choose to blame persons who live along flood plains. But not to cast the blame game this morning, but to prefer solutions. How do we begin to address this issue of flood in Nigeria?
Well, the challenge of Nigeria is that we only remember flood during rainy season. There is no adequate plan for it in terms of disaster reduction plan, disaster risk reduction. We have not engaged in that, possibly because it pays the coordinating agency to respond to emergency. Because in such response, and often accountability is a casualty. Maybe when you look at the political economy of emergency response, you begin to appreciate why Nigeria has abandoned disaster risk reduction plan, comprehensive one for Nigeria. Flood is a perennial problem in Nigeria. Several committees have been set up, but there's no implementation of even the suggestion and the recommendations of those committees. When you have a country like this, the basic thing that is requested for you to have a very robust, engaging, functional preparedness plan is for you to first, you have to consider you have to map the hazard. Specifically now, if you are talking of the flood, what are the causes of flooding in Nigeria? You have to look at it in terms of the quantum of rainfall that is being witnessed recently in this era of climate change. You have to take that into account. Secondly, you have to look at if you now appreciate that the volume of water that you are going to receive in particular year, for example next year, will be so high, possibly higher than what you have gotten this year now. The next thing is for you to look at what do we do? How do we accommodate excess volume of water? That will take you to issue of a comprehensive plan for having dams. The ones that are available, maybe you expand them, you reinforce them in terms of the structure so that they don't collapse. That means that you will have mapped all those things in your hazard before you now continue to do that. Secondly, you look at the river channels that you have in Nigeria, whether it's River Niger, River Benue, River Sokoto, any river, anywhere, and Adamawa, everywhere you have river, you have to look at it. Is it possible now for us to begin to expand the channel of this river through what we normally call it deepening and expansion of those river channel? And then you make allowance for that, you make budget for that, you effect that. What you are inevitably do, and of course, if there is need for you to construct new dam that can accommodate more waters based on your hazard assessment, and then you do that. At the end of the day, you will be left, even if there has to be flood, it won't be in the quantum, a destructive quantum of what you have had in most places that they have happened. Flood has happened this year in Nigeria. in Niger, in Adamawa, in Zamfara, in everywhere that we are witnessing unnecessary casualties now. We are not supposed to be having that. So it is failure to prioritize disaster reduction, risk reduction activities when it comes to flood emergency. We have not done that. So we will continue to have it because it pays those that are responding. Like I told you, accountability is the first casualty. The meaning of that is that they have more money for emergency response. In most cases, money they don't account for, money that you can't track, money that, because at that particular time, what you are left with is for you, one, to offer relief to those who are alive, and possibly, which they don't even bother on, much about, to recover, relief and recovery. Recovery means that you get back those that are dead, where possible and if possible. And in our cases, in most cases, we don't even bother about them. We just see them, we just count them as those that cannot be accounted for. That is where when we even have accountability chart or framework to say that. So a lot of people are just dying because of this thing. I remember that President Buhari, at the 20th age of his regime, tried to set up a committee, but nothing came out of it, no report. Even before President Buhari, we have developed one severally and made recommendations on several issues that can be done in order to address this perennial flood. But governments, both at state level, at federal level, they don't bother. The responsibility of NEMA is to offer coordination, national coordination. That is bringing all the SEMA together, State Emergency Agency, bringing up the all local government agencies together so that they understand the plan, they can implement the plan where one exists. And the emphasis, I repeat, should be on disaster risk reduction and not emergency response.
Now Mr. Gbenro, Mr. Gbenro, quite brilliantly, you've laid a background to this conversation. I'd like for us to break it down so that our viewers are carried along as well. You've talked about the lack of accountability being the biggest bane of this challenge. But in talking about the causes of flooding, you also talked about the rivers which overflow their banks and part of the practicable steps that can be taken to in some way mitigate the eventuality of floods. I would like to talk about the provision of ecological fund, which in some cases also raised the eyebrows on accountability. Now, the ecological funds that have been made available, how can actors and states alike ensure that there is accountability in the deployment of these funds to provide for counter dams in the event that the cause of flood is an overflowing of dams?
Well, in a very corruptive environment that is ridden with corruption, ecological fund means nothing to the governors. They don't care. That is what I'm saying. They don't care. In fact, they see it as, even when they are doing ordinary, which is supposed to be a critical aspect of governance, when they are doing response, they see it as charity, as if they are helping people. That is not so. That is why when I don't know how it will be done. Rather than releasing this ecological fund to the government, look, everyone should come on the same table. What are you going to do it? And it must be attached to something. For example, I was talking of dredging. For example, dredging of River Niger and Benue. The impact of River Niger and Benue has been so enormous on Kogi State, on Niger State. The Kogi State alone cannot dredge River Niger because it's not even in their state alone. Even all the states among the borders. We have inland water agencies in Nigeria. The money for ecological fund, there should be a meeting between those states that are contiguous to River Niger, at the banks of River Niger, at the banks of this thing. This your ecological fund, with additional fund from the federal government, we are going to use it to dredge this River Niger so that we reduce the impact of flood on your state. Not that you just give governor ecological fund and they divert it and use it for something else. They don't use it to address the problem. That is what ecological fund has become. It's just like groundnut money in the pocket of governors. Even where they collect it, they don't use it to address anything related to flood or ecology, ecological disaster. That is my point. That is the point I'm making. Look, nothing gets done in a corrupt system that we have built, and there's no accountability. Have you seen anybody holding any governor to account for even normal state revenue outside the shouting game that ends nowhere on with EFCC?
Mr. Gbenro, many will talk about the fact that Serap has been suing for this accountability over time with multiple lawsuits, but much like you've agreed to, it seems to have yielded little or no results.
You know, I mentioned of in a corrupt system. Corrupt system includes a failure of our justice administration system to dispense justice. You take people to court today, you are fighting for people that just died. That how can thousands of people died in for example in Niger State recently
in the Mokwa floods.
Nobody said account. The report is not out. What happened is not known to most people, and it was a sudden onset of flood, of disaster that happened. It was sudden. That means that it was not the volume of water received from rainfall alone, possibly from breaking down a collapse of dams in the area that are not taken care of by government, even using their ecological fund. So who is held accountable? Those people are just they have died, and even the money donated to them, up as I'm talking now, except if it's done today, it has not been given to the families. The money donated by the federal government and others is still within the cover of the state government. Is that how to respond to emergency? Is that how to plan? Nothing is done in terms of risk reduction, in terms of emergency response that can assuage the people, that can create hope, that can look at that. People are rebuilding their home in that environment now without people doing even soil examination, carrying out soil, which is the responsibility of government to immediately do, whether that soil can even carry the mud house they are building or the poor houses they are building. So those are challenges we are having. Look, before disaster can happen, disaster means that there is risk. It means that there are vulnerable people that are in contact with hazard. So if I don't live at the bank of Niger now, if there is overflow of River Niger, I am not vulnerable because I am geographically non-vulnerable. But there are people that are geographically vulnerable. And there are some people that are economically, their vulnerability is determined by their economy, by the type of money they have. For example, if Dangote should build a house in Mokwa where we had flood disaster, and poor person, the house of Dangote might not be affected by the flood because it's likely to be more structurally fortified than that of a poor man. That is how to count. You must accept vulnerability of people so that even if there is flood, it doesn't lead to disaster. Disaster means that, for example, flood has happened and it has overcome the capacity of the people or community to cope with it, thereby causing enormous damage, including death, including loss of livelihood, even to some institutions too. That is when disaster is said to have happened. It's not because rain fall or there is flood. It is possible for us to have flood without disaster if the environment is properly channeled. For example, in Lagos State, there must be proper channels where waters are channeled to right ways. There must be a plan to accommodate that. So when you don't do all those things, well, you are likely to have a disaster. So it's predictable. We have a situation that is predictable and avoidable where there is a robust preparedness plan.
Now, Mr. Gbenro, quite rightly, like you stated, in Mokwa, in Adamawa, the areas which have been most affected by flood in Nigeria this year had alerts that were issued earlier. They also had budgets as delineated to address these issues of a potential flood. But now the challenge we're seeing is the fact that responding to these alerts, either issued by NIMET, either issued by agencies like yours, the Emergency and Risk Alert Nigeria, is the challenge with compliance. How better can we equip Nigerians to respond when they receive alerts from your organizations and other agencies about the potentials of flooding in their areas?
Alert does not mean that people are prepared. Look, when you issue alert, what you have recognized is that there are population at risk. That alert is not for the people, ordinary community who knows nothing, who might not even be aware of alert to take action. Both action must be initiated by government. And you can't issue alert for poor people who is living in a mud house to quit that place without a place to go. There is responsibility imposed on government when such alert has been issued, like institution like or agency like NIMET. The responsibility is that, okay, you have to evacuate people. Where do they go? Do you have camp? Every state in Nigeria must have emergency camp. It might not be living camp where internally displaced person can go when there is emergency or when you want them to be evacuated. You can't just issue alert to people to evacuate. What is action the state is taking? That is how it is done. Even in the United States, people have been evacuated recently from Texas flood and everything. And you see, people still died, but then they were able to evacuate substantial number of people, and they were given houses where they could be in low-cost houses for some time. That is what you call alert. Look, emergency, there cannot be effective early warning mechanism without early action. There must be early warning and there must be early action. And that is how you prevent people from becoming victims of disaster, of among us this thing. So that account for that. But you don't just issue alert for people who have no option. Poverty reduces option that people have. A poor man if you issue alert that there is going to be flood in Atlantic in Lagos Atlantic City today, because the rich are the one there, they are likely to have houses in the mainland. So it is easier for the rich person to obey such alert even when it's not aided by government. If you issue alert that there will be flood now where Dangote has his home, where Otedola has his home, they will quit immediately. They won't even think twice because they have option. The poor people have option. That talk on the vulnerability of people. So even in the conduct of your district, there must be vulnerability analysis, and this will come inside your own preparedness plan. You must, if this thing happen, who am I going to rescue first? For example, let me even quit flood and look at cholera. Oh, if there is outbreak of a cholera in a particular area now, vulnerability analysis will tell you that you have to rescue children before their parents. Why? Because children are likely to die quicker if they don't have immediate medical intervention. That is how you do conduct a vulnerability assessment. And that when you have done that, it is not everybody. Make provision for camp, transit camp, IDP camp. I'm glad because I was part of those who initiated the one in Lagos. So with the emergency body, Lagos State Emergency Agency, in those days, I think it was 2007 or thereabout. So in Lagos, you have IDP camp at Agbowa, where people can be evacuated to about 5 places. But other states, they don't care. You just issue alert and people should move. Move to where? And you are not talking of one person. You are talking of them, their children, their parents, and possibly relatives and other people living in that environment. So we must consider all these things. It's not a job of charity when state is doing it. That is the critical aspect of governance. Welfare of the people and their security is the cornerstone of governance, and that is adequately prepared for in our constitution. So they are not doing anybody favor by putting all these mechanisms in place. So risk can be reduced. So people can be snatched from jaws of unnecessary death through disaster.
Now, I must thank you, Mr. Gbenro, for highlighting the urgency at which these actions must be taken to protect the lives of Nigerians and calling for accountability in the deployment of ecological funds vis-a-vis budgets that have been earlier earmarked to attend to this perennial incidence of flood. But now let's talk about an issue that has to do with inter-country collaboration. Because often at times, the narratives Nigerians have been given for floods, particularly around the Middle Belt states, is the inactivity or activities of surrounding dams in Cameroon. The Lagdo Dam has been referenced, and if I recall correctly, in the 70s and 80s, there were certain provisions made and the conversation started for Nigeria to have counter dams. We've had some government officials saying that the Cameroonian government ought to give us notice before they open the dams. What's the truth, in your opinion, on how to deal with these matters of inter-country collaboration in mitigating the impacts of flooding in Nigeria?
Yes, I know that there is need for inter-country collaboration, whether through multilateral agreement or bilateral agreement. For example, River Niger flows through almost 5 countries. But let me state this, which is germane to the first line of safety in any emergency is yourself. I'm even talking of personal now. I will give you an example of certain things that I don't do. If I am driving now, and there's a driver in my front, and I can't see the front, and the driver is using his hand for me to pass, I won't pass. Because my safety depends on me first. If I don't see what is coming, I don't know what his own assessment, I don't know his, how functional are his eyes or his sense of judgment. Some have obeyed such order or such assistant and run into accident before. So the safety of Nigeria should depend on Nigeria and not what happened with Lado Dam. That is why I'm saying it's not only today they are opening Lado Dam in Cameroon, but what have we done? Have we built buffet, assuming that you must know the volume of water that is being released, because that will be given to you. And Cameroon, whether you like it or not, they have to say that why they release the water is to prevent the dam from collapsing, thereby flooding every part of the country. When you know that they are going to release them, because even if you don't know, you have built a very huge one that accommodate the water. You have dredged River Niger or Benue, that the rivers they release can fly into without overflowing the banks. That is the responsibility of Nigerian government and that of Cameroon. So we must save ourselves. We must know that we are the first hand of safety in terms of disaster. And so at the end of the day, when we do such thing, if Cameroon let it release any volume of water, the assurance is that you have a well-fortified dams to accommodate that volume of water. All your River Nigers and Benue from your side, they are adequately channeled, adequately dredged to accommodate more waters without overflowing their banks. And then, if there's anything, there's nothing wrong in signing the agreement, not because you are not prepared, but because you just want to be at peace with your neighbor, so that you are prepared. Then you have such agreement in place in order to be at peace with them, to accommodate their own nuances, and of course to live in brotherhood or sisterhood with contiguous countries, and not necessarily because their action will have unmitigated impact on your own environment or your people. So the square responsibility for this action is that of Nigeria.
And the Nigerian government. Mr. Gbenro, brilliantly put there. But before I let you go, my last question is, as we as citizens, we've talked about our own behavioral attitude in terms of refuse disposal, building across flood plains, and some of the inactivities of man that contributes in some way or the other. What is our responsibility as a people to do our bit? Borrowing from what you said, let's be our own first line of safety.
Yeah, I think Nigerians should become more disciplined in terms of waste disposal, particularly those who live in the cities. It's appalling, but it's still a joint responsibility. For almost 2 weeks now, those of us who reside around Guarimpa, we find out that despite the fact that we pay for this thing, the disposal vehicle has not been coming for some time. I look at a place in front of a house, the thing overflow, and at the dustbin they put there overflown, and it's causing mess around this. This is a joint venture between the state and the people, but Nigerians can do better. But one thing I still want to emphasize is that government should. There's need for replanning, because redefining where it is in this era of climate change. I used to make one statement: everywhere is becoming waterways. So the government should not be using that as excuse for tampering with or destroying people's houses, in most cases without paying them for that. They under the guise of rechanneling the water. There are several ways water system can be rechanneled now. Some people, if you go outside, they are underground way, and this will not allow friction to be between the people and the citizens. There are a lot of angry people in Nigeria of today that have been affected economically or that have been injured by activity of government through demolition. So there must be comprehensive study to identify strictly that where waterways should be. That study will include soil scientists, we include geographers, we include urban planners, we include all associated organizations, institutions, and bodies that can provide a solution. Not that a minister will go to a place and say this is a waterway, demolish house. Things are not done like that. And that is why we are not in control of anything. Despite the demolition, despite the claim, there's still flood when they occur in those cases, because they are not properly done, they are not atrociously done, they are not done with research, their activities are not backed with a comprehensive study that actually identify the problem and remedy that can be offered in order to alleviate the troubles and the problem.
Well, I must thank you, Mr. Gbenro, for taking our time to lend your voice to this advocacy, because I believe it is one, as we discuss the topic of finding a lasting solution to flooding in Nigeria. We appreciate you.
It's a pleasure being with you. Thank you very much.
Have a nice day, sir.
And you too.